Okay, well, this is Dave Gaddis, and today we're interviewing David Hoover in Houston, and this is November 18th. So, welcome, David.
Thank you.
Why don't we start
Happy
at
to
the
be
very
here.
beginning and tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in DeLand, Florida on February 17th, 1952.
Okay, and did you stay in Florida your entire childhood? Or
I was there all of 6 months.
Okay,
My dad was from Sherman, Texas, and my mother was from Providence, Rhode Island. And my dad was in the Navy. They met, got married, wound up being stationed in Pensacola for a while, and along came me. And we went from there to Rhode Island, and I was there until I was 5, and then went from there, basically one little stop along the way, but went to Galveston in 1959, and that's where everybody except me has pretty much spent the rest of their lives. My parents both stayed there, and both my sisters were born and raised there, so my mom used to tell me I was the vagabond.
so technically you're not one of the born on the island folks.
I am not. I'm still a tourist. My sisters are real, but I'm not.
So you graduated high school in
At
Galveston?
Baha'i.
Okay, and then where did you go to college?
Went to the University of Texas and the University of Houston.
Okay, and what did you study at the University of Texas?
I started off in business. Seemed like the right thing to do. I worked at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin while I was in school. That's how I got through school. And I loved the hotel business, hospitality and all of that, but figured it probably wouldn't be the best way to spend a living, raise families, all those things you think of when you're, young. So I got a business degree and went to work for, at the time, Houston Lighting and Power for 3 years as an accountant. Absolutely hated it. And then switched from that and went to work for a company at the time that was called INA. They're now Cigna. It was Insurance of North America. They merged with Connecticut General, and I worked a lot in the development division, which is where I first learned that there was a thing called a city planner.
Okay.
And after 6, 7 years of doing that, I realized I was on the wrong team, so went back to school again and did work in public administration at University of Houston, and right before I finished that, I got hired by the city of Galveston as a planner, and that started my planning career.
Okay. And so the work at INA, did you actually get involved in the development, or was it just the funding of the development?
No, it was actually the developing. I didn't mention earlier, I grew up in the construction business with all of the relatives on my mother's side. The sisters all married in 2 families that did construction in Rhode Island, did subdivisions and small shopping centers and office buildings and those things. So from the time I was 3 and 4 years old, I was hanging around construction sites. So I knew that, and then actually built houses in between the time of INA and the time I started in the planning world. But when I was with INA, that's pretty much what I did, was the development side of things.
And what year was it that you started in Galveston?
1988, 87, 88.
And who was the planning director at the time?
A guy by the name of Mike Elms for my first 2 weeks, which were his last 2 weeks that he took vacation, so he officially was never my boss. And he was from Colorado and went back to Colorado. And Steve Richardson was the assistant director for about 3 months. And then he left to go to Beaumont and retired from there. He was director there forever. And so 3 months after I got there, I was running the planning department. I wasn't the official director, but I was I was never given the title interim director, but for all practical purposes, I was basically the acting director.
And how long were you there?
2 years.
Okay. Anything?
Probably the longest 2 years of my professional career.
As a follow-up, anything exciting happened while you were there, or what was the issues going on?
That is the time period when parking and open beaches kind of hit its heyday. But at that time, it was under the Attorney General's office. And so most of the dealings that went on with open beaches and parking and access and so forth was done with people in the AG's office. And the Land office had a little bit to do with it, but really not that much. And so most of the rules that are in play in Galveston still today, and South Padre Island and Corpus and the other places, were actually developed during that 2-year time frame. And that's also about 6 or 7 years after the historical foundation really had gotten up and got going. A man by the name of Peter Brink, who had put all of that together and actually started the whole historical foundation movement there as their director, executive director. I spent a lot of time with them during that process, so I learned a lot about AG's office and open beaches and the issues associated with that, and learned a lot about historical preservation that went on. I mean, what better place to learn that in Galveston?
So where did you go after you were in Galveston?
Went to Abilene.
Like culture shock?
I left. It was very much so. I left Galveston because, having been in the development world and having worked for a company with INA that had, the best attorneys and the best pretty much anything you needed, I knew that part. And I thought, well, why not start in Galveston? Because, I know all that there is to know, quote unquote, about the actual physical development part and the issues with it. It seems like a natural. I should be able to do this pretty easily. What I learned in my first 2 years in the planning world is that politics is one of those things you really don't get a lot of schooling in anywhere, whether you're at school or you're out in the real world, if you're not immersed in it. And so it was a good experience, and it forced me to get outside of my comfort zone, which was to go someplace where I didn't know anybody, anything, none of the politics, none of the history, because it helped me learn how to cope with it. And so I was hired to go to Abilene without ever having been to Abilene. I was hired over the phone and was brought in, and my main mission, if you will, was to set up neighborhood improvement programs and neighborhood planning. And it was a great experience because, like I said, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know any of the politics. So I wasn't influenced one way or the other by history because I had none. And so it was a good opportunity. It really was. I was there for 4 years, and they still are doing some of the things that I started when I was there. So that always makes you feel good. When you leave a footprint, it makes you feel good.
And specifically the neighborhood improvement program, or
Yeah,
other issues?
yeah. We did all sorts of things back then that now are a stretch from HUD and all of the community development block grants and all of the programs that go with it. But the neighborhood program that we set up is called DIP, Neighborhood Improvement Program, and at the time there were about 50 neighborhoods in Abilene. And so we set up a process to where we would go out, do a survey, and take that survey and develop a small needs assessment, if you will, kind of a micro neighborhood plan, and put it together. And then while we were going through the process of having the public meetings and developing what that neighborhood wanted specifically, we were already into the next neighborhood starting the survey so we could get that information back. And the goal was to put the cycle in to where every neighborhood would get touched every 4 years. And it worked. It was a lot of work getting it started because there hadn't been anything done in a long time. But it was a good program, and through it we did things like paint programs, free paint for seniors or people who couldn't paint their house, and we used a lot of volunteer labor from Dyess Air Force Base, which is a big presence out there. And we painted close to 300 houses in that time frame, helping people. We paint almost 1,200 people or houses as far as the overall program was concerned, with just supplying the paint. And got crossways with HUD a couple of times because they believed that we should be doing lead-based paint assessments on these houses, even though all we were doing was giving away the paint. And so that would have cost, it was about $300 back then in paint to paint the house, and it would have been, $2,000 if you did the assessment. It's like, what's the point here? We're not doing this. And so got nasty letters from Jack Kemp at the time, or his staff actually, and then got a nice letter back from him that says, it's not such a bad deal. You can keep doing that.
So what after Abilene?
After Abilene, I went to Friendswood.
Okay.
And that was kind of coming back home, so to speak, and closer to the island, or but back with the comfort zone, I guess, as far as the area. Nice community, obviously affluent, good schools. Was one of the communities that I've worked in that when I got there wasn't a lot of commercial activity. It was a bedroom community, and it was something that they chose to stay, was a bedroom community. I wanted some commercial, limited things, maybe a nice restaurant to go to, and maybe a few small, low height type and density type office, just for minimal type of employment. But basically they were enjoying being a residential community, and there was a lot of pressure to change that because of the location being close. A lot of the NASA people live there, and so there was a lot of pressure to grow and create those types of things that the community really didn't want. So it was almost a reverse of what a lot of times you get doing. Is it wasn't so much what can we bring in, it was how can we keep things from coming in and still maintain character and tax base and all of the things that you have to do. So it was a good experience. Very different from Galveston, very different from Abilene.
And were you city planner or planning director? Or?
Yeah, the way the planning director, quote unquote, was the city planner, who was also over building and did whatever economic development efforts there were there, because there were no 4A, 4B sales tax and no economic development department. So you did kind of, was my first gig at doing all three things at the same time.
And I believe I first met you when you were working at Friendswood, so you were involved in APA. How did you get involved in APA?
That came about when I was in Abilene. When I first got there, West Texas, and most anybody who's ever been out to West Texas will understand this, everything is 200 miles from everything else. And so the section as a whole, if they had a lunch meeting, it pretty much burned up the whole day for everybody except where the lunch meeting was, because you had to get in your car and drive all the way there, had your meeting, or hour and a half lunch, and then you drove back, and by the time you'd done that, you'd pretty much blown the day. And in Abilene, we had about 11 planners, including the transportation section in the department when we were there, and they would alternate who could go when the meetings were not in Abilene. And so when I first got there, I didn't really know anybody in the other cities out there anyway. I basically cut a deal that said, look, you let me get involved at the state level, and I'll cover the office for all of y'all, and y'all can do what you want to do at the section level. And none of them had any desire to be at this or do anything at the state level anyway, so it worked out well. And so I called Jerry Hebert, who I didn't know from Adam at the time, and said, Jerry, I want to get involved. And so he appointed me. My first official position was the chair of the communications committee, which basically did almost nothing. But it got my foot in the door, and it's how I met most of the people that are my peers that, some are still active, a lot aren't because of the fact that was a long time ago. But that's how I got there. So if it wasn't for Jerry, who knows? I may have never been around. He might have said no, and that would have been the end of it. But
Okay. So how long were you at Friendswood?
So in Friendswood for 4 years.
I see a pattern.
Yeah, so isn't it amazing? It's almost to the day each time. It's kind of ironic, and sometimes it flows with the politics of a place. I've always viewed what I did as a planner going to different places as sort of being like a hired gun. I mean, people don't bring you in to force them to do what you want to do. They bring you in so you can help them do what they want to do. And that's a lesson I think some people have a hard time with, because you're spend a lot of time learning about all of the best practices and the right things to do and how to do them and so forth. And then you get someplace and that's not what they want to do. And you can either beat your head against the wall and you know, probably wind up not spending as much time there as you might have liked to, or you can help. And so when it gets to the point to where what they want to do really isn't what you want to do, and I'm not talking about illegal or immoral, I'm talking about things that you enjoy doing that are fun, or you know, the types of planning processes or what have you. If you get to the point to where you're not happy, then you know, it's pretty much on you to do something about it, because the odds are they're not going to change and all become like you all of a sudden. And so in most instances in my career, in fact, just about every instance in my career, about the time that has started, and it usually comes from elections, which may be part of where that 4-year cycle comes in, and sometimes it's a 2-year cycle. But there was somebody else who wanted to do what I wanted to do, and so it kind of worked out. It's you know, how I got to Abilene, it's how I got to Friendswood.
So where'd you go after Friendswood?
After Friendswood, I went to Stafford.
Okay.
And that was really just supposed to be a stop on the way to South Padre Island. And when I got there, the law firm that was the law firm for Friendswood was Olson & Olson, which is where Kim Mickelson is affiliated now. And they were a really good law firm, I thought, and did a lot of municipal and school, county, mostly government work, in fact, just about all government work. And they were also the legal counsel for Stafford. And Stafford didn't have zoning. And the mayor, Leonard Scarcella, wanted zoning. And so the law firm said, look, before you go down to South Padre, why don't you spend 3-6 months with Mayor Scarcella, put a zoning ordinance in play, and, you know, then go on. That way it'll be good for everybody. And I thought, okay, it's a good experience. I've never actually started one from scratch. You know, I'd redone a few in the other jobs, but I hadn't started from scratch with a place that didn't have zoning. Stafford was a unique place, still today. It's the biggest city in the state that has no property tax. They make money from manufacturing and sales tax and all sorts of other things, so it's appealing to a lot of people. But as you can imagine, to have that kind of income, there has to be a lot more of other things than there are single-family residential houses, because if they're not paying property tax, they're not paying anything, so money's got to come from someplace. So the ordinance was a good process, but that 3 to 6 months wound up becoming 2 years. And part of that was Mayor Scarcella wanted me to get involved in economics, and he wanted me, the economic development part, and he wanted me to learn how the lobbying process worked at the state of Texas. And so he actually had me spend a lot of time when the legislature was in session going back and forth with the city's lobbyists to learn what they did, why, how, where. And that was invaluable from my perspective to doing, you know, the planning things that you do, understanding how the state government truly works, not how it works in the textbook, but the reality of who does what. You know, very rarely do representatives or senators make the, or not make the effort, but there's not enough time in a day for them to read everything that they have to read to make decisions that they make. And so they rely on their staffs heavily to do that. And each has different staff members with different expertise. And so learning how that works helps tremendously when you need something done. You just kind of cut to the chase and go to the right person and sit down and give them useful information, and you can actually get things done. And that's one of the reasons why I think Stafford's been as successful as it's been.
So did Stafford adopt the ordinance?
They did adopt the ordinance. Still have it today, as a matter of fact. So, very good. So then, South Padre. Finally got there. I'd been going to South Padre Island since I was in high school. I just always thought it was just a great place. Small, great beaches, almost the same climate because it's almost the same parallel line with Miami Beach. So it's not like the rest of the state most of the time. It's, you know, the humidity is much less for being on the water, which is not normal. The sand is white. It's, you know, very crystal. The water is clear. You walk out to your chest still, and you know, see your toes, and that's pretty rare along the coast. And it's not because the water's dirty. Well, it is dirty, but it's the sand from the turbulence and such from the current that's in the Gulf. But by the time it gets down that far, all the sand has dropped out, and it's fairly clear. I mean, it's not the Bahamas by any stretch, but it's very nice. And so I thought, well, this would be fun. You know, I had all this experience with beaches and the land office and the attorney general's office, and I thought, well, this will be a kick. And the city manager down there, a guy by the name of Ray Kendall, had been after me for a while because he wanted to do some things that they hadn't been able to do in the past for various reasons, spiffing up boulevards, doing things on the bay. You know, the town of South Padre Island is 2 miles long and half a mile wide, and that's pretty much all there is. There's 3 main roads that run north and south, one on the bay, one in the middle, one on the Gulf, and then the other streets run sideways, and that's it. And so the opportunity to do things are somewhat limited because of the space, but the opportunity to do things is enormous because of the money and you know, the sales tax and the hotel tax and all those sorts of things. And so it seemed like it would be fun. And so I went down, and it turned out not to be quite as much fun as I thought it would be. And the main reason is there's basically 2 things to do in South Padre Island: hang out on the beach, hang out in the bars. And part of my job was managing the beach under the planning division. I managed a little trolley system that's down there and manage the beach, and of course the planning and building and those things that went with it. And so I'd spend a couple hours a day out riding around on the beach, and then, you know, after you've been doing that, then it's time for happy hour, where practically the whole town goes, and so the different places. And so I thought, it's going to be a long career down here if I hang out in the beaches and the bars most of the rest of my adult life. So I thought maybe this wasn't a good idea. So
any particular accomplishments in South Padre, or is it just status quo maintenance?
Most of it was status quo. We tried to make a run at a couple of things, and they just didn't turn out. Difference of opinion with the city manager, which, you know, we all have at times. And there were opportunities that could have been, I think, really enormous face-changing opportunities. Building a boardwalk on the Bayside, for instance, that connected all of those restaurants and bars and hotels that were along there. We could have gotten money from the General Land Office at the time for beach access opportunities that would have paid for 90% of that. And the owners were going to pay for the other 10%. And the city manager just didn't think that's what we should be doing. And so we were never allowed to apply for that. So I think that was a major missed opportunity. And then on the other side, and this is some of the foolishness, I think, that exists in government, but transportation at the time would have allowed us to take the Gulf Road and turn it into the bypass of the main road that goes in the middle. Okay? No, I mean, really. Y'all, you got to come to the same bridge, so let's be real. But it was there. It was an opportunity. So we could have gotten funding to do some major landscaping and enhancements and new paving and new parking and all those things on the Gulf side. Again, with a very substantial amount coming in and a very minimal amount having to come up at the local level. And you know, the thought was, well, that's not really what we ought to be doing. And so not being able to do those types of things, which is what has always driven me, is getting things done. You know, that's the fun part of doing what we do, I think, is it's not just sitting in a room and writing stuff. It's actually making things happen. And I think that's making things happen that the community wants to happen. And that wasn't going to be the case. The handwriting wasn't on the wall, and so I thought,
So how long
okay.
were you in South Padre?
Not quite 2 years.
And then where'd you head to there?
Not quite 2 years. And the reason I left is when the conference was in South Padre Island, the city of Houston asked if I wanted to come work there. And to basically be, at the time, probably a good description would have been a liaison between the planning department and the mayor's office, because of the kind of all-around experience that I had in doing different things. And it seemed like it would have been great fun. Would have been good opportunity, would have had an opportunity to deal with the Greater Houston Partnership in that process, and really would have been, I think, something enjoyable to do. And the conference was in October, and I told them, okay, if you can make this happen, we'll do it. Well, we went through October, we went through November, we went through December and January, and I'm still lost in the paperwork shuffle in human resources at the city of Houston. And my friend Jeff Braun, who was city manager in Rosenberg, says, what do you think about coming and being my economic development director? I said, we don't really have a planning director, but it's all done through their engineering department, but we can do economic development and planning out of the same position. What would you think about doing that? And I was like, hadn't really thought anything about that, to be perfectly honest. But, let me think about it for a little bit. And I did, and I knew Jeff, and I knew Rosenberg, and I knew there was opportunity to do things there. And so, and didn't seem to be anything going on with Houston, and I was kind of ready to get, make a change. I'd already decided I was going to, and so it's like, okay, I'll do it. And I did. So I went to work there, and we started the ball rolling with most of the development that you now see in Rosenberg that's along 59. All the things that are out, the big centers, the residential developments, all those things that we put in place. And so it was more of that help make something happen, which is kind of fun. And while I was there, and I was only there about 2 years, and that was probably, after I got there, that was probably less than I thought I would work there. But I got a call one day from Marina Sukup, and Marina was the director of planning and community development for the city of Allen. And we were talking about something completely unrelated to jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And Marina was talking about how she'd tried to hire an assistant director twice, and both times they were there for almost no time at all. One was there for like a couple of weeks and one for like 3 months, and both left. And she says, I just don't understand it. And she says, it's not like you would come here or something. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I said, maybe. And she said, well, think about it and let me know. I said, okay. So that weekend, whatever day that call was, I don't remember, but that weekend I went up and spent the weekend in Allen without telling anybody. I just thought, I'll go scope this place out. And the opportunity that was there was enormous. It was just looking without even having talked to anybody, other than the conversations, minimal conversations I'd had with Marina about Allen. I knew that the opportunity was there to kind of put all of the things together that I'd picked up from all the different places that I'd worked, as well as what I'd learned from the development side of the equation, which was pretty substantial. A lot of people do the opposite from me. They start in the planning world and then they go to the development world, and I kind of did it backwards, and so, or different, depending. So I called Marina back on Monday and I said, okay, I'm coming. She says, great. So you have to go through an interview. I said, okay. And I get up there, and the interview is with Peter Vargas, the city manager, and Marina, and the human resources director. And it's like 5 minutes. And Peter asked me 2 questions. One was, so you know Marina? I said, yes. And he said, and you still want to come work here? And I said, yes. And I was hired. So that was it. And then roughly 6 months later, Marina moved on, and I became director, and the gig started, so to speak. That was right at the very end of 2000, December-ish.
And how big was Allen at that time?
43,000 people.
Okay. You happen to know what it is when you left?
85,000 people in 2008. The second and third year I was there, we were the fastest growing city in the country. And then there was a year after that we were fastest in the state. And then Frisco and McKinney started. We were actually bigger than both of them for a while. And then they kicked in and started with, their rapid growth. And I think I just saw the other day McKinney's back in the top 5 again, I think, as far as growth. We were landlocked, so we knew ours was going to be, a limited amount of fastest growing, so to speak. But the development that was there, it's a very unique place. And it's only unique, I mean, every place is unique. But the thing that I thought that was kind of special about Allen was the leadership was able to develop a consensus and a vision of what they wanted. I mean, and then they were like, we're here, put us there. And then they would literally allow staff to go out and get it done. And I think Peter probably put together one of the best staffs, and nothing against other places and other people, but the staff that Peter put together I'd have stacked up against anywhere. Everybody was really good at what they did in their particular arena. Most all A personalities, and for a manager to manage that many A personalities is pretty stellar. That doesn't happen often, but everybody pushed everybody. The drive was continuously there to be better, be better, be better. And we did some great things.
Such as?
Got part of the development that was there. Well, initially, it was classic bedroom community. It was almost nothing. There was no place that you could go and buy a sport coat, for instance. I mean, there are limited restaurants, and the community wanted something more than that. They wanted office buildings that were low profile, that would fit the campus style environment, so it didn't become this mecca out on the freeway someplace, and, tall buildings. And they wanted restaurants, and they wanted the types of stores that they went to in other communities to buy the things that they wanted. And so at the same time, everybody wanted to keep the quality of life. And so we weren't talking about malls and mega shopping centers, or Sam's and Costco's and all these other sorts of things. Most of those came later, but they came as a part of the environment that was developed. They didn't come and then develop the environment around them. And so they were actually low impact and low profile in the various developments. And we had Montgomery Farms, which is a conservation development that won awards from literally everybody, both from the state all the way to the national level. The architects, the engineers, the planners, pretty much everybody, the landscape architects, all gave awards to this for almost all the components that were in there. It was a mixed use portion of it that, truly mixed use, with the office and the retail and the restaurants and the residential components all mixed in together. Something that you find in an urban area that you typically don't find. And it was surrounded by conservation subdivisions that had very, very, I don't want to say loose rules. They were defined rules, but there was a lot of flexibility that was built into the ordinance as it was created. And they took 18 months to 2 years to put these things together, because change is hard. One of the things, probably the absolute #1 thing on my list of things that I've learned in the business is people are almost always afraid of 2 major things. One is change, and the second is what's going to happen to the value of their house, which almost always comes back to they're afraid of change. If you don't understand it, you're afraid of it. That's normal. It's normal. And the only way to compensate for that is to prove through a track record that you're not there to ruin somebody's property value on their house. What you're going to do is you're going to make it better. And so that process, it takes a while to garner the trust, and it takes a while to produce the results, because just because you come up with an ordinance doesn't mean anything. If there isn't anything on the ground after you're done, then you just wasted a bunch of time and effort. And so that Montgomery Farms was stellar. We did another development with a group called the MG Herring Group out of Dallas. A man by the name of Buddy Herring at the time, it was his company, and his son runs it now, Gar. But Buddy was old school developer, and he believed that your word is your bond, and we had lawyers, and we had everybody's lawyered up when you do things like that. But from Buddy's perspective, is you shake hands, we got a deal, move on, next topic. And he was kind of a special person, and there was a accumulation of land that took place over years before anybody really knew what Buddy was doing. There was about 400 acres on the Allen side and about 250 acres on the Fairview side, and this became the villages at Allen and the village at Fairview. And at the time it was being built, it was the single largest development going on in the United States. And they had Prudential was their partner, and Bank of America was their financing. And that took the better part of 2.5 years to put together, and it was a little bit of a different style, more of an open air center than a true mixed use, because it had very limited amount of residential that was a component of it. Most all of the residential was on the Fairview side. And we had the stores, the shops. We worked with them to put in a hotel, a Marriott hotel with meeting space, convention space. We put in a multi-purpose event center that had a hockey team and an indoor arena team, football and a basketball and a soccer league teams that were in that, as well as all of the Disney on Ice and performances and all those things. And we worked with the developer to actually get the Herrings to pony up some money, if you will, to help build that facility and the adjacent parking structures. And then the city, through time, is repaying them through different development agreements. Unique, only one like it. When we first were going down that path, we were looking around the whole country to find some sort of a template that maybe we could use to get it all reduced to bottom line. If it's not on paper, it didn't happen. And so there were none. I mean, it was such a unique concept and unique opportunity, and it's been wildly successful, I think. And the city has benefited greatly from that whole environment that's there. Cabela's moved in shortly thereafter, so it's a pretty cool place.
So it's such a great job. Why did you leave?
It was at the point where there were a couple of things going on. It was in the summer of 2008. My dad had passed away several years before. My mom wasn't doing well. She had Alzheimer's, and my sisters had been spending the bulk of the help as far as Mom was concerned, because they're all in Galveston and I wasn't. And when I first had gotten to Allen, we spent about 3 to 6 months with the council trying to figure out, okay, what's the vision? And we just literally took an aerial photo and had it on the wall, and we'd discuss it a little bit at every workshop meeting before every council, basically drawing circles. What do you want? Office here, you want retail here, residential here, how many people do you want? Let's figure out all those things, and then we'll work backwards and we'll make it happen. And the consensus had always been 90 to 95,000 people tops. And so we worked backwards from that. And we were at about 85,000. There was really not much more. I mean, it wasn't built out. It was pretty close from a residential perspective. Not totally. But where the residential was going to be was pretty much done and finished. where the office, where the retail. Probably wasn't going to be that much more retail that was in there. We had acquired a golf course and we're building more holes in the golf course. Parks Department's probably one of the best and most awarded Parks Departments around for all of the things that they did. So we had gotten to the point to where the big deals really weren't going to be there anymore from the development side of the equation. The big deals were going to come from the economic development, the 4A, 4B corporations going out and recruiting the businesses and doing those things. So that, coupled with the fact that there was that desire to get back home, closer to home for a little while, and I had 20 years in the TMRS system, I thought, you know, I don't really want to go someplace else again. Allen was hard. I mean, it was great and it was fun and it was rewarding and I don't regret any of it, but it was hard. You know, there was a lot of stuff going on in that 7 or 8 years' time, and there was a lot of hard parts with it, that because of rule number 1 and rule number 2, people don't like change, people don't want you screwing with the property values, and so there was a lot of pressure always, and it was at the point to where I thought, you know, I could go do this someplace else, one of the next burbs out, of which there were several opportunities out there, or, you know, I could just walk away from this and say, okay, that was it. It was a good ride.
So what have you been doing since 2008?
I've been mostly building houses. And I went back to Galveston, and the first thing I did was redid the house that I grew up in, which is where my mother lived. And they'd bought it in 1963, 4 or 5, something like that. And redid it, gave it a really nice facelift in August and September, and in came Hurricane Ike and put 6 feet of water in it. So the second thing I did was redid the house again, which was interesting to say the least. It was a heck of a lot easier the second time around because it was basically totaled and, you know, could use insurance money that time.
Except that you had to deal with FEMA.
But it was pretty easy. It was actually pretty easy. I was one of those ones that had the flood insurance, and so it really wasn't, you know, it's skirting around like everybody does, as far as not saying anything's illegal, but, you know, it's always one perception versus somebody else's perception about, well, what constitutes 50%? You know, if the slab's there, the utilities are there, the walls are there, it's a brick house, and you're completely redoing the inside. Is it 50%, or, you know, are we talking value? Are we talking the appraised value, which of course never really has anything to do, I mean, the CAD appraised value versus the real appraised value, those are usually vastly different. And so the council at the time made some decisions about, you know, okay, here's the way this is going to work. And so I fell down on the right side, I guess, of the decision, and so redoing it was kind of cool. And it gave me a chance to really be creative. So this time, you know, I did major things that I didn't do the first time. And also took the opportunity to pick up a couple other houses that had been damaged that were on the water and redid them and sold them, and then took that money and started building other houses, which I've been doing. Built 14 houses now, I guess, since that time. And still doing, because, you know, once a planner, always a planner. So still doing consulting work, sometimes with teams, as a member of a team, and sometimes just individually for a bunch of cities around the state. I did some work with Karen Mitchell right after I left the city of Allen while I was redoing my house, both times. She had taken on some jobs in the middle part of the state and asked if I'd help on those little projects, and so I did that for a while, and I worked on a few gigs with Patty Joyner, Knutson Joyner, and worked on a couple of things with Kim Mickelson, but, you know, for the most part I've been doing the building the houses, doing the minor planning gigs just to kind of stay involved in that process, and some of those are still fun. Going and talking to the city about what you need to do to actually make sure your ordinances are in sync with what you want to do from the economic development side. A lot of communities don't realize that they're in conflict with themselves in those two departments, because a lot of times those two departments don't really talk to each other. And you get the economic people that promise the moon and the planning people that tell you there is no moon. And then you got to sit there and figure out, well, maybe it's just a half moon this time. How can we put this together? And that's always kind of fun to me, watching those light bulbs go off.
So when we last left you with APA, you were with Jerry Hebert on the communications committee.
Yep.
So tell me your progression through APA.
Well, I did the communications for a little while, and then while that was going on and I had left Abilene, I was in Friendswood, I became the Houston section director, not once but twice, which was interesting. And then when I was in South Padre Island, I was section director down there, and then I came back to Houston and I was section director again, and then I went to Allen and I was section director there. So I spent a lot of time on the board in various capacities like that. And along the way, let's see, when were you president?
97 to 99.
Okay, 97 to 99. 96, there was a rumor I ran for president.
No, I was recalling yes.
Yes. And that was my first taste of defeat in the planning world, so to speak, running for something, which was a good experience. At the time, it was right when I was leaving Friendswood, I had personal issues that were going on. I would have made a terrible president during that time period. And I've told you this before. It was probably the best thing that could even come close to happening was to not win that election, because hopefully I won't go down as the worst president ever now, since I did eventually win. But it was just, some things are meant to be, I guess. And I think that's an incredible lesson. At this last leadership forum, slightly off track here, that we had at the conference with all the national people there, I think almost every one of them, it said, I lost at some point. I lost this or I lost that. And, I've seen people during my career, when they lose, they disappear. And I think that's unfortunate. I really do, because there's something you can do that just because you lost that particular race or that particular project or whatever it is, that your position that you were going after, there's still things to do. And when I lost that, I think it was not the drive, so to speak, but the opportunity for me to start working on conferences. And it kept me involved. So I didn't have to disappear because there wasn't anything there to do, and there really was no communications department to go back to, or committee, or whatever the heck it was called at the time. And I had a couple of slots on those weird things. I actually tried to get off the board not tried to get off. I just kind of rolled off the board a couple of times, and there was always something that came back up that said, come back and do this, come back and do this. So this last conference was, I think, the 14th one. It's what McAnally tells me anyway. The 14th one that I've been involved in, and probably over the last 9 or 10 have been pretty extensively involved as the chapter's coordinator over the different conferences, and that's been really fun. I think that's probably been from. And of course, I was president, for a term, and that was great fun too. But I think the most, as far as actually giving something back, I think, everything that any of us do, I think, gives something back to the organization, and but the planning part, the conference part has been great.
And just for historical context.
Sure.
The chapter changed the way it did conferences.
Yes.
About 97, 99.
Twice.
Where the conference took much more of a role in doing the conference. In prior years, the section pretty much did the entire conference. And so you have really kind of helped formulate that role of conference coordinator.
Yeah, when I first started, we actually were on a 9 section rotation because we had 9 sections. And 2 of the sections dropped out because logistics and probably a bunch of reasons all rolled in, but it primarily was logistics and people. You know, there just were not enough people in the southeast section, and they were spread out too far in the northwest section. And so both of those sections decided, you know, this is just, we're not going to do this. And so it was in a 7 section rotation. And that process was going along, and things cost more money. I mean, that's all it is. And we used to be on a system where it was basically cafeteria style, like National. You know, you pay for your registration, and then you pay for lunch, and then you pay for a reception, and then you pay for everything. And that was something that I thought we needed to fix. Again, for a lot of reasons, the way that we're structured, finance directors don't typically like to see something where you're paying $75 to go to some nighttime activity. You know, that doesn't really set off the warm and fuzzies all the way through funding when, you know, budget times come and so forth. And so I felt like we had to fix that. And so we switched over to now everything is included in the registration price, which I think is good. But that means that the pressure mounts significantly on the conference to do better. You have to be more efficient. You have to find things that are more profitable to do, so you can continue to include all of those things in the process. And part of that was to go back and revisit the 7, and we've recently changed it again, the 7 section rotation, and knock it down to 3 regional, so we can have some of the section areas competing against each other. Not the sections themselves, but the hotels and the convention centers and the properties compete and hopefully be able to manage those prices better, because hotels have gotten out of control as far as some of the sites are concerned. So that, I think, has helped. First conference that I was involved in, I think we had about 275 people. And this most recent conference that we had in Frisco, we had 940. And I know the first conference that I was fortunate enough to get the board to go along with, saying, well, let's try paying for everything. I think we made about $3,000, and the board panicked, rightly so. And the next year we went back to adding everything on, and it just so happened the next year we were down in South Padre Island, kind of back in one of my second home, so to speak, and we were able to flip it back, and we actually really made some money that time with everything included, and we've never looked back. It stayed that way. But that first one was in Galveston, and it was a learning curve, believe me. But I think it's turned out well. The way that it's progressed, the way that the attendance has grown, the way that the conference, and I think the sessions and the content of what you get when you come and attend the conferences, I think, has gone up tremendously too. Not that it used to be bad, but you know, if we had 3 concurrent sessions going on, that was a pretty big deal. You know, we now have 10 when you count in the 2 for the planning commissioners tract, and that's enormous. We had 160 speakers this last time from all walks of the development world, planning and engineering and transportation and ULI and CNU and all the other buzzwords or letters, acronyms, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a tremendous, tremendous service that our chapter gets that I think a lot of the other chapters don't.
So you've planned a lot of receptions and done a lot of conferences. Any memorable conference events that stick out in your mind?
Oh, probably the one that I remember the most. Partly because it was the first that I would say, and I don't want to say totally mine, because that's nonsense. I mean, these are team sports. You know, nobody does it all by themselves. It takes a lot of moving parts and a lot of people to make these things happen. But Galveston, the first time where I had more of my fingerprints on it, so to speak, all of the evening activities were planned outside. And it started raining the day before the conference, and it rained every minute of every day until Saturday morning. And so the year that the planning had gone on for each of those nighttime events went right out the window, because every night while everybody was sleeping, those nighttime events for the next day were getting changed and redone. And that was a monumental task, and I think most people never knew. You know, it was, and I think mostly because it was in Galveston, because a lot of the people that worked in these different venues were people I'd grown up with. And we were able to do that. And they moved things around and shifted things. And, you know, the caterers were able to do different things. Not saying it couldn't have happened someplace else, but I would tell you it was a little bit easier, I think, there than it might otherwise have been. But, you know, that is always stuck out there as one of those unique experiences, so to speak. The conference in South Padre, I think, was fun. Because it was different. You know, all of them are different. They're all different, and I think that's what you strive that you want to do. You know, I think when we've done different things in the Metroplex, being in Fort Worth when we went to the Mod, I think was something that was unique as far as an experience goes, and as far as an opportunity goes. But you know, there's a lot of things that went badly that, you know, behind the scenes, you got to deal with it. You know, people show up, microphones don't work. People don't show up. You know, somebody's supposed to be standing in a room with 50 people speaking, and there's nobody in that room speaking. And, you know, those are just kind of the things you just kind of go with.
So over your career, are there any particular mentors, people that kind of help guide your career, or people that you looked up to as you developed? Or?
Most of what I consider my peer group are people like you and Frank Turner, Mike McAnally, Dick Lilly. You know, those are the people that I not only learned from as far as being involved in the organization is concerned, you know, what you can do, how you can do it, you know, how you make a difference. You know, you can show up, but you're not really helping anybody if that's all you do. You know, you got to come and you got to bring your work clothes, so to speak. You know, you have to contribute something if you really expect to get anything out of it. So, you know, I think I learned that from a lot of y'all, and you know, Karen Walls and Carol Barrett. It's that whole, I call it our peer group. I don't really call it a generation, because, you know, the way I see how our organization works, we have about 10 to 12 to 15 year spurts or skips, so to speak, people that fit in those what I would call peer groups, as opposed to generations where you're talking maybe 20 or 25 years where we skip. And so that you know, level, and I you know, obviously back to Jerry, and some of that group is not as involved anymore as they used to be, because frankly we're all a little older. A lot of them are retired now. That's why they're not involved anymore. And some either changed, you know, they maybe, if they'd gotten out of planning and gotten into management, you know, some of them aren't as involved as they used to be. But I you know, every day you learn something from. You gotta do is open your eyes, and you know, if you listen, don't spend all your time talking, then you know, I think you can learn something, and that's, you know, that whole group is who I learned a lot from. A lot from Dick, you know, from his experience. He was obviously older than the rest of us, and Dick kind of took me under his wing and helped with a whole lot of the processes that go with the planning conferences and all the other things. But
How about proteges? Maybe people that you've hired and worked for you, or people that younger folks that you've worked with in the chapter?
I think that from a protege perspective, Lee Battle, when I was lucky enough to hire him away from College Station and bring him to Allen, is probably one of the smartest things I did. Because, Lee is very, very, very good at managing and running things. That the management part in the big picture thing, I think I'm really pretty good at. I think that's one of my strengths. The detail, getting it done thing is not. In some areas, some I'm fine with that, some not so much. And I think when Lee came in, that our whole organization changed because of his ability to take care of the things that needed to be taken care of in the office, because I was doing a whole lot of things outside of the office, doing economic development and doing the recruiting and the dealing with these developments, and all the time that was involved in doing those. I mean, we'd have meetings that lasted days, trying to hammer out all of these things. Well, the world goes on while that's going on, and so Lee was invaluable, and he still is. I mean, he still does a tremendous job there, and so I've always been appreciative of not only what he did, but what he does and can do, and he still stays involved. A lot of I've been fortunate enough to sit on the nomination committee for several times now, and I think if you look at the presidents that have been presidents since me, I think the diversity is terrific. We've had people from little markets, people from big markets, we've had women, we've had everybody. Hispanics, you name it, they've been involved, and I think from a diversity and a participation perspective, I think that has been really good for the organization, and I think it shows at our conferences. And I think the latest movement, so to speak, of which people like Doug McDonald and Chance Sparks, I mean, these people stand out to me because they're the spark plugs of their peer group. And, the involvement, you look at this last conference, and for the first time, I'm looking around and I'm like, geez, half these people in here are babies. A, they're not babies, I'm just older. But B, that's our future. And, being a part of that change is kind of fun too. So I can't really say that, 250 emerging planning professionals are my proteges by any stretch, but the fact that hopefully we're doing something right, and it's getting them to see the opportunity to get involved. I think a missed opportunity someplace, and again, you got to learn from your experiences. I think, and I've said this to Wendy and to Doug and other people, I think my peer group, which, again, here's the good and the bad of you being in that group that I put in there, I think we were allowed to do so much by people, and we like doing it so much that we continue doing it for so much that we let the next peer group right under us, Lee, Trey Fletcher, John Comiskey to a certain, all of that peer group, I don't think we gave them the same opportunity that we had, and what Doug and Chance and Wendy, Wendy's probably closer to John and Trey and all, but same opportunity that they're going to have. And it's hard to figure out how to make that balance, because it's normal for people to depend on you if you're perceived to be doing something well. It's hard to walk away from something if you enjoy doing it. And it's harder to walk away from it if there isn't someone that you think is going to be able to pick up the slack and do it. But you don't know that until you give them the opportunity. And I think that might have been, something, and looking back, I don't know, other than, all of us saying, okay, we've done it 10 years, now we're done, y'all figure it out. I don't think that's the answer, but I'm thinking there has to be something that's there that can be different, and maybe it's expansion and doing different things. Maybe it's doing things differently. And I just spent a little bit of time talking to Kelly Porter and Chad Como, and again.
So, do you have any particular advice for a young planner coming right out of school? What should they do to maximize their career?
I think you have to decide which side of the fence you want to be on at some point. And meaning, do you want to be in the public side, or do you want to be working on the private side? Do you want to work for a private consultant, or do you want to work for a developer? Do you want to work for a county? You want to work transportation? I mean, on the surface, it's easy to say you need to make up your mind, figure out what you want to do. But they're very different, being on the consulting side versus being on the city side, so to speak. Consulting is not just about going out and doing good things. A lot of times you get hired to do things, and that's what you're doing, and period. You may not like it, but, not so unlike the way it is at the city sometimes. But, you have to go out, and sometimes you've got to find the jobs in the first place. So you're doing marketing, you're hustling jobs, you're doing all these other sorts of things. The billable part is probably a little more glamorous than it seems. You see, wow, look how much money that they make. But, at the end of the day, you probably are working twice as many hours, too. So you got to factor all of that in. And some people I just don't think are cut out to be people to be in the public. There are people who are wizards at writing stuff, ordinances and regulations and all. And you put them in a room, and they don't want to deal with people. I don't mean, hermits, but, they don't really want to deal with the public on a regular basis. And they're terrific at that. It doesn't make any sense to take that person and force them to be at the front counter to deal with everybody who walks in the door. That's just foolish. And we've all been in environments where that happens, not just in planning. But I think if you yourself can decide at some point where your strengths are and what you like doing the most, which is not necessarily what your strengths are, and you can balance those two things, I think you're going to be a lot happier in the long run. And then I think you need to get involved. You need to get involved at the section level. And everybody who comes up right out of school, becomes a planner, doesn't have to be driven to be president of the organization. I think that's a foolish thought. But I do think getting involved at the section level is helpful to you. Talk to other people, you find out what's going on, find out what's in their lives, what's important, what's not important. Sometimes it's good because you find out, it's really whatever the thing is that is bothering you the most is not unique to your situation and where you are. It's probably going on all over the place. It's just sometimes part of life, and I think that's helpful. Misery loves company, as they say.
So we've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about, or we got it pretty well covered?
No, I think that the opportunity that I've had is something that a lot of people haven't had. That the run of the conferences. I've been lucky enough to be able to do that for a pretty long time. I mentioned being able to be on the nominating committee for a long time. I've been on the board for what seems like forever now. I feel like the historian. I'm the history, so to speak, because I've been there so long. And I think that's good and bad, like we talked about a little bit earlier. But the opportunity has been great. I appreciate it. I enjoy it. It's fun. And I'm grateful for it. But it's I do my best, and hopefully the chapter gets some benefit out of it too.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you
Thanks a
very
lot.
much.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.